I used to think I understood the world. I had traveled through Europe, toured parts of Asia, explored well-developed cities, and lived in a country where skyscrapers were so common that no one noticed them anymore. So when I booked my first flight to the Philippines, I carried the same assumption many foreigners secretly hold. That would look like the glossy pictures in travel magazines. Endless beaches, grand malls, luxury resorts, and buzzing nightlife. A rich, tropical paradise. I imagined palm trees beside five-star hotels, smooth highways stretching across the islands, maybe even a lifestyle similar to the wealthier cities I'd visited in the past. But what I discovered when I actually stepped foot in Manila shocked me in ways I never expected. Not because the Philippines was poor, but because it was rich in ways I had never understood. What I thought would be a simple vacation turned into a journey that challenged everything I believed about wealth, happiness, and what it truly means to live well. This wasn't just a trip. It was a rude awakening wrapped in beauty, chaos, and kindness. And nothing prepared me for what I was about to learn. My assumptions began to crumble the moment my airplane touched down at Ninoy Aquino International Airport. Instead of a glamorous tropical arrival, I stepped into an environment buzzing with movement. Families reunited, OFWs returning home with tears in their eyes, and airport staff greeting people with sincere smiles. The vibe was chaotic but warm, messy but human. It felt different from the polished, silent airports of Europe. Here, you could feel emotion in the air. And then I stepped out into the Manila heat, thick, heavy, and unapologetically real. The traffic hit me first. Cars, jeeps, motorcycles, tricycles, buses, and people everywhere. At first, I thought, how can a country be rich if the traffic looks like this? But as I sat in the taxi, I began noticing something else. People talking to each other across vehicles, vendors helping strangers, kids waving at cars, drivers laughing despite the chaos. The city felt alive. It felt human. This wasn't the kind of rich I knew before, but something told me I was missing the bigger picture. And I was right. Manila wasn't trying to impress me. It was showing me its heart. My first shocking realization came when the taxi driver, a middle-aged Filipino named Joel, started talking to me as if we'd known each other for years. In my country, taxi rides were silent, cold, transactional, and quick. But Joel was different. He asked about my trip, my family, my work, even my favorite food. He told me stories about his kids, his dreams of visiting Japan one day, and how he worked 2 jobs but still found joy in the little things. At first, I thought he was just being friendly. But as the ride continued, I realized something deeper. Filipinos communicate with heart. They don't talk to fill silence. They talk to create connection. And connection, I would soon discover, is a form of wealth that many nations lost in their pursuit of success. When we stopped at a red light, a beggar approached the cars. Before I could reach for my wallet, Joel handed the man a small bag of food he had prepared for his own dinner. "He needs it more, sir," he said, smiling. That simple act hit me hard. Wealth in the Philippines wasn't measured in what people kept, but in what they gave. The next morning, I stepped out into Manila with the goal of exploring the city on foot. Everywhere I looked, I saw contrasts. Towering malls beside humble sari-sari stores, luxury condos overlooking narrow streets, and vibrant murals painted on cracked walls. But strangely, none of it felt wrong. It felt alive. Filipinos didn't hide their imperfections. They lived through them, around them, and above them. As I walked through Bonifacio Global City, BGC, I finally saw the version of the Philippines I originally imagined: clean, modern, organized, and wealthy. It looked like a futuristic Asian city, filled with skyscrapers, art installations, and stylish cafes. I was impressed, of course, But the shock didn't come from seeing wealth. It came later, when I hopped into a jeepney and traveled to a more local part of the city, a place filled with laughter, street vendors, children playing outside, and neighbors who treated each other like family. That's when I realized the real truth. The Philippines wasn't rich because of its buildings. It was rich because of its people. Because no matter where you went, there was life. And where there is life, there is abundance. I visited a wet market next, guided by a local friend I had met online. Her name was Mia, a cheerful young woman who insisted on showing me the real Philippines. The market was loud, crowded, and full of smells I couldn't even describe. But what amazed me was how effortlessly Filipinos interacted with each other. Vendors joked with customers. Strangers greeted each other like family. A fisherman proudly showed me his fresh catch, even though he knew I wasn't buying. "Welcome to the Philippines," he said, laughing. Everywhere I turned, people smiled, not because life was easy, but because they chose joy over misery. I had lived in cities where people earned high salaries but couldn't smile, where people had everything but felt empty, where success was measured in possessions, not peace. But here, in a humble market in Manila, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth, comfort, community. It was like the nation shared one giant heartbeat. And for the first time, I understood why so many foreigners fall in love with the Philippines. Not for the beaches, but for the humanity. The more time I spent with Mia, the more my understanding of wealth changed. She took me to her home in Quezon City, a modest apartment shared with her mother and two younger brothers. It wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with photos, laughter, homemade decorations, and the smell of freshly cooked adobo. Her family welcomed me like a long-lost friend. They insisted I eat with them, even though they had cooked only enough for themselves. "There is always more when shared," her mother said, smiling. That sentence stayed with me. In my country, people guarded their space, their food, their time. Here, they open everything. After dinner, her family sang karaoke, a common Filipino tradition. One of her brothers sang horribly, but everyone cheered for him anyway. And that's when I realized happiness didn't require perfection. It required togetherness. I used to think the Philippines was rich because of its tourism and natural beauty. But the reality amazed me. The Philippines was rich because of its culture, its values, and its people. Wealth here wasn't money, it was connection. The next morning I woke up early, determined to see the real Philippines beyond my hotel window. I took a jeepney for the first time, squeezed beside students, workers, and a grandmother holding a basket of vegetables. No tinted glass, no air-conditioned comfort, just wind, noise, laughter, and the conductor shouting, Bayad pa." As we moved through the city, the view shifted again, gleaming office towers on one side, old apartments and small carinderias on the other. I realized something important. This country wasn't one thing. It wasn't just the polished version I saw online, and it wasn't just the sad headlines either. It was both, all at once, glamour and struggle riding in the same jeepney, literally side by side. I got off near a big mall because, in my mind, malls were always a sign of wealth. Inside, it looked like any mall in the West. International brands, expensive perfumes, designer shoes, and endless food options. But when I checked the prices against the average salary I'd read about, it hit me hard. A single branded sneaker could cost half a month's wage for many workers. The mall wasn't proof that everyone was rich. It was proof that in the Philippines, like many places, luxury existed in the same space as quiet financial stress. People took selfies, window shopped, and treated themselves once in a while, not because they were rich, but because joy was a form of survival here. I left the mall and wandered down a side street. The air changed. The pavement cracked. The buildings shrank. Kids played basketball barefoot on a makeshift court, using a rusty ring nailed to a wooden board. A woman grilled barbecue on the sidewalk, the smoke mixing with the sound of tricycles and laughter. This wasn't the postcard version of the Philippines, but there was life, color, and noise everywhere. A little boy waved at me and said, "Hi, Joe," with a huge grin. I'd imagined poverty as silent and miserable, but what I saw was toughness wrapped in creativity. People weren't waiting for someone to rescue them. They were hustling, adapting, surviving, with a smile that didn't match the harshness of their circumstances. Later that day, I met Carlo, a local guide I'd been chatting with online. Over coffee, I told him honestly, I thought the Philippines was rich based on what I saw online. He laughed, not mocking, just honest. "Bro, the country is rich," he said, "but not the way you think." He explained how social media amplifies the lives of the lucky few, the influencers, the well-traveled, the children of politicians or business families. But for most Filipinos, he continued, life is about making to the next month, sending kids to school, supporting parents, and maybe still sending money to relatives. That's when he introduced me to another reality I had barely understood. The OFWs. OFWs stand for Overseas Filipino Worker, and Carlos said almost every Filipino knows at least one. "My sister is in Dubai as a nurse," he shared. "My cousin is a seaman. My uncle is in Canada." They leave their families, their homes, and sometimes their children to work abroad, often in tough, lonely jobs, just to send money back. I had always assumed people working overseas were chasing luxury. But here, it was about survival and responsibility. The remittances, Carlo explained, help keep families afloat, pay debts, send siblings to school, fix roofs, buy medicine. The country looked richer from the outside partly because millions of Filipinos were sacrificing quietly on the inside. That evening, Carlo took me to his neighborhood. It wasn't a gated subdivision or a glossy condo. It was a modest barangay. Narrow streets, sorry stores, kids running around, wires crossing overhead like spiderwebs. A karaoke machine blasted a ballad in the distance. He introduced me to his parents, who insisted I sit and eat, even though they clearly didn't have a lot. Plate after plate appeared on the small table. Rice, adobo, pancit. "Kain Teo," his mom said, smiling. I felt a lump in my throat. I had never seen generosity like this from people who had so little materially. I realized then that the Philippines is rich, but the currency is not just money. It's hospitality, inclusion, and shared food, even when there isn't enough. We ate and talked for hours. Carlo's father told me how he once worked in construction abroad, lived in cramped barracks, and sent almost every peso home. His face looked tired, but when he spoke about his children graduating, his eyes shone. "Worth it," he said simply, "in that small home, with its thin walls and mismatched chairs. I felt something more valuable than the chandeliers I'd seen in Makati hotels. Sacrifice that wasn't bitter, love that translated into action. It hit me that my definition of rich had been painfully shallow. I thought wealth meant what you could show. Here, it meant what you were willing to give up for the people you loved. Over the next week, I traveled more, Manila to Cebu, Cebu to Bohol, then finally to a small town in the province. Everywhere I went, the pattern repeated. Glossy images at the top, quiet struggle underneath. I met call center agents who spoke flawless English at night and slept on thin mattresses by day. I met students who walked long distances to school but laughed like they carried no burden at all. I saw fishermen patching old boats, Mothers budgeting every coin and grandparents raising grandchildren while their own children worked overseas. The Philippines was not the Instagram fairy tale I imagined, but also wasn't the hopeless poverty story the news liked to sell. It was something more complex, more human, more real. One particular moment stayed with me. I visited a public school where Carlo's aunt taught English. The classrooms were crowded, the paint peeling, the fans barely working. Yet the energy was bright. Kids greeted me with, "Good afternoon, sir," and big smiles. Their notebooks were neatly arranged, their uniforms cleaned and pressed even if a bit worn. I asked the teacher how she kept going despite the limited resources. She shrugged and said, "Because these kids still have dreams." She pointed at one boy. "He wants to be an engineer." She pointed at a girl. "Future doctor." None of them were born rich, but they were rich in ambition. It made me wonder how many great minds the world never sees because they come from places like this. At night, I walked through Provincial Town Plaza during Fiesta. There were colorful banderitas overhead, loud music, food stalls, families dressed in their best outfits, children with balloons and cotton candy. You'd think everyone just got a promotion the way they celebrated, but most of them were still living paycheck to paycheck. That's when Carlo said something that stuck with me. Filipinos will celebrate even in the middle of hardship, not because life is easy, but because joy is resistance. I realized then that the country's richness wasn't in the absence of problems, but in the ability to keep smiling, singing, and dancing in spite of them. I also saw the other side. Problems no fiesta could hide. Traffic that stole hours from people's lives every day. Floods that returned every rainy season. Families squeezed into tiny rooms, sharing one electric fan. Farmers struggling against unfair prices. Workers enduring long shifts for low pay. It would have been dishonest to romanticize the struggle. Yet even in the middle of these issues, people still said, "Kaya pa," which roughly means, "We can still manage." It wasn't blind optimism. It was survival wisdom. They weren't ignoring their reality. They were refusing to be crushed by it. That kind of emotional resilience, I realized, was its own form of wealth. One afternoon, I sat in a small coffee shop and scrolled again to the travel vlog that at first made me think, Philippines is rich. I watched my own previous assumptions play back. The luxury resorts, the drone shots of skyscrapers, the perfectly edited beach scenes. None of it was fake. Those places exist. But what the video didn't show was a house helper commuting 3 hours, the waiter sending half his salary to the province, or the janitor outside the mall sweeping in the heat. The Philippines is rich in beauty, yes, but that beauty sits on top of layers of history, inequality, sacrifice, and quiet endurance that rarely make it to the final cut. That night I wrote in my journal, I thought the Philippines was rich. I was right, but also completely wrong. I had equated wealth with what my eyes could see in glossy images. But after meeting real people, I started to see another kind of richness, relational, emotional, spiritual. The Philippines is rich in community. Neighbors look out for each other. If someone's house burns down, people donate clothes, food, and time. If a relative dies, even those with very little contribute what they can. I'd grown up in a culture of individualism, where success was personal. Here, success was shared, and so was struggle. That kind of collective heart is priceless. I visited an OFW family support group one Sunday. It was held in a simple hall beside a church. Wives, children, and elderly parents of overseas workers gathered to share stories, pray, and encourage one another. One woman showed me pictures of her husband working on a ship. He missed our daughter's first steps, first words, first day of school, she said, tears in her eyes. But because of him, she's in a good school now. The contradiction broke me. This country was rich in love, but that love often demanded painful separation. I realized wealth here didn't mean having everything. It meant being willing to lose something to protect the people you love. On my last trip before leaving, I went to a rural coastal village. There were no luxury hotels, just simple houses, clear water, and children swimming in the sea at sunset. I watched a fisherman return with a small catch, not much by any standard, but his kids greeted him like he'd brought home treasure. They helped him clean the fish, laughing the entire time. I thought about my own life, about how many times I'd needed more, wanted more, chased more. Here, they had little, but gratitude filled every moment. The Philippines, I realized, is rich in a way that doesn't show up on economic charts. Rich in contentment when there's food on the table and family around it. The night before my flight back home, I met Carlo one last time. We sat on a rooftop, looking over the city lights. I told him, when I first came, I thought the Philippines was either rich or poor. Now I see it's both and neither at the same time. He nodded. We're a country of extremes, he said. Extreme hardship, but also extreme heart. I asked him if he ever felt bitter about the imbalance. The mansions beside shanties, the sports cars beside tricycles. He took a deep breath. Sometimes, he admitted, but I also believe things can change. And until they do, we survive together. That word, together, summed up everything I'd witnessed. On the plane, I watched the islands grow smaller beneath the clouds and felt an ache I didn't expect. I had come as a curious outsider, armed with assumptions made from polished screens. I was leaving as someone who had been quietly changed by the grit and warmth of a people who deserve far more than the stereotypes they're given. I realized that calling the Philippines poor missed the richness I had seen, but calling it rich without context dismissed the daily struggle of millions. The truth lived in the tension. A nation rich in heart, but still fighting for fair opportunities, justice, and stability. When I got home, people asked, so, is the Philippines as rich as it looks online? I didn't know how to answer simply anymore. I told them about the skyscrapers and traffic, the luxury condos and the cramped jeepneys, the malls and the markets, the fancy brunches and the 5-peso street snacks. I told them about Carlo's family feeding me when they barely had enough, about kids studying beside candlelight during brownouts, about nurses and caregivers working abroad, so their families could live with dignity. The Philippines is rich, I said, but not in the way you think. It's rich in people, in resilience, in kindness. Most just nodded politely, but a few asked more. I started sharing more online too, not just beach photos, but stories. A picture of a fisherman with a caption about sacrifice. A jeepney ride video with a note about daily commute realities. A photo of a family dinner in a small barangay with a reflection about generosity. Slowly, my followers started commenting, I never knew this side of the Philippines, or I only saw the resorts before. That's when it hit me. I had once been part of the problem, consuming and sharing only the polished parts. Now, I want to be part of the correction, showing a fuller, truer picture of the country that had quietly re-educated my heart. In time, the Philippines stopped being just a trip in my memory and became a reference point for my life. When I caught myself complaining about small inconveniences, I remembered mothers juggling 3 jobs. When I felt lonely, I remembered families separated by oceans but connected by nightly video calls. When I rushed through meals, I remembered slow Filipino dinners where conversations mattered more than time. The country left fingerprints on my habits. I started greeting people more warmly, listening more patiently, and valuing relationships over schedules. I didn't just visit the Philippines. A part of me, in some quiet way, stayed there. Looking back now, the most shocking part isn't that I was wrong about the Philippines' wealth. It's how confidently wrong I had been. I thought I understood a country from a handful of vlogs and curated photos. But wealth and poverty are never just numbers or images. They're lived in daily routines, in silent sacrifices, in invisible wounds, in unrecorded joys. The Philippines taught me that a place can be financially struggling yet emotionally abundant, politically messy yet spiritually strong, chaotic on the surface yet deeply ordered by unspoken rules of care and respect. So when I hear people joke about third world countries or make fun of Filipino accents, I don't stay quiet anymore. I tell them about the nurse who stays after her shift because a patient is scared. I tell them about the father overseas missing every milestone but paying every tuition. I tell them about the young student who dreams of becoming the first engineer in their family. I tell them about a nation that sings through storms, rebuilds after typhoons, and still has the heart to welcome strangers with cane teo and a smile. I remind them that if wealth were measured in heart, the Philippines would be one of the richest nations on earth. In the end, the title of my story remains true, but for a very different reason. I thought the Philippines was rich, and the reality amazed me. Not because I discovered endless luxury, but because I discovered something deeper, layers of courage, kindness, humor, sacrifice, and hope that no algorithm can fully capture. The Philippines is not just a destination for cheap holidays or aesthetic content. It's a living, breathing lesson in what it means to keep loving life when life doesn't always love you back. And if you're willing to look beyond the filters and step into real conversations, you might just walk away like I did, quietly changed and amazed.